Wrocław lies in the heart of Europe, known for its historic architecture, colorful market square, and more than 100 bridges. Yet millions of people travel here every year for something entirely unexpected. They come to look for gnomes. Hidden across the city are more than 1,000 tiny bronze figures. Some sit beneath benches, others climb lampposts, guard doorways, or quietly watch the streets from unexpected corners. Finding them has become one of Wrocław's biggest attractions, with official maps, mobile apps, and guided tours helping visitors track them down. Each gnome has its own name, personality, and story. Many represent local professions, businesses, universities, charities, or important moments in the city's life. Together, they have become the most recognizable symbol of Wrocław and one of the most unusual urban traditions anywhere in the world. The obvious question is why? Why did an entire city choose tiny bronze gnomes as its symbol? How did they become more famous than many of Wrocław's historic landmarks? And why do new gnomes continue appearing every year? The answer has nothing to do with fairy tales. It begins during one of the most difficult chapters in Poland's modern history, when a simple drawing of a gnome became an unexpected symbol of protest, freedom, and creativity. That story would eventually transform Wrocław into one of Europe's most unique cities. The story of Wrocław's gnomes begins in the early 1980s, when Poland was still under communist rule. Public demonstrations were often banned. Censorship controlled newspapers and television, and criticizing the government could lead to serious consequences. Open protest carried significant risks, forcing many people to search for new ways to express their frustration. One of the most unusual responses came from a group of students and artists who called themselves the Orange Alternative. Instead of organizing traditional political demonstrations, they turned to humor, absurdity, and street art. Their goal was simple: make the authorities look ridiculous without using violence or direct confrontation. The gnome became the movement's symbol almost by accident. Whenever anti-government graffiti appeared on city walls, the authorities quickly painted over it with large patches of gray paint. Rather than writing new slogans, members of the Orange Alternative began painting cheerful little gnomes on top of those gray rectangles. Every attempt to erase political messages unintentionally created another canvas for a smiling dwarf. The idea spread quickly. Soon the tiny painted figures were appearing throughout Wrocław, and people immediately understood their meaning. A gnome represented something the authorities could not easily control. Arresting someone for painting political slogans could be explained by the government, but arresting people over funny little gnomes only made the regime appear even more absurd. The movement soon expanded beyond street art. Its members organized theatrical happenings in public spaces, arriving dressed as gnomes, handing out flowers, toilet paper, or candy, and staging humorous performances that attracted large crowds. These events confused the police, amused ordinary citizens, and challenged the government without relying on traditional political protest. As the Orange Alternative became more popular, the image of the gnome evolved into something much larger than a drawing on a wall. It came to symbolize freedom of expression, creativity, and the belief that laughter could sometimes be a more powerful form of resistance than confrontation. When communism ended in Poland in 1989, the movement itself gradually disappeared, but its symbol remained deeply connected to Wrocław. Years later, the city decided to preserve that legacy in a completely different way. Instead of repainting walls, Wrocław placed its first bronze gnome on the streets, creating a permanent reminder of the movement that had once challenged an entire political system with nothing more than humor and imagination. Few people could have predicted that this single sculpture would eventually inspire more than 1,000 others and transform the identity of the entire city. The first bronze gnome appeared in Wrocław in 2001. Known as Papa Dwarf, the small statue was placed on Swidnica Street near the spot where members of the Orange Alternative had once organized many of their performances. It was created as a tribute to the movement that had turned humor into a symbol of freedom, and at the time, few imagined it would become the beginning of a citywide tradition. Over the following years, the idea began to grow. Instead of treating the first gnome as a standalone monument, the city, local organizations, businesses, universities, and cultural institutions started commissioning new figures. Each one was designed individually rather than copied from an existing sculpture, giving every gnome its own appearance, profession, and personality. Some represent firefighters, doctors, librarians, professors, musicians, or postal workers. Others celebrate museums, theaters, charities, restaurants, hotels, banks, and local companies. Many were created to mark anniversaries, recognize important institutions, or honor the people who help shape everyday life in Wrocław. Rather than telling the story of kings or military leaders, these miniature sculptures celebrate the ordinary people and professions that keep a city running. As their numbers continued to grow, the gnomes became something much bigger than public art. Visitors began creating their own walking routes to find them. Guidebooks dedicated entire chapters to their locations, and local businesses quickly realized that tourists were willing to cross the city just to discover another hidden figure. Before long, searching for gnomes had become one of the defining experiences of visiting Wrocław. Today, there are well over 1,000 officially registered bronze gnomes spread across the city, with new ones appearing almost every year. Some are easy to spot in the busiest parts of the old town, while others are carefully hidden beside churches, inside courtyards, near bridges, or outside buildings that inspired their creation. Even people who have lived in Wrocław for years continue to discover new gnomes they had never noticed before. This constant growth is one of the reasons the tradition has remained so popular. Unlike a museum collection that stays the same, Wrocław's family of gnomes continues to expand, giving both residents and returning visitors a reason to keep exploring. Every new sculpture adds another small chapter to the city's story, proving that even the smallest characters can leave the biggest impression. The next question, however, is where these tiny figures are hiding and which ones are worth searching for first. Because while every gnome has its own story, a few have become true legends among visitors to Wrocław. One of the reasons Wrocław's gnomes have remained so popular is that no two are exactly alike. Each sculpture was designed specifically for the place where it stands, and most were created to represent a profession, an institution, a local tradition, or an important part of the city's identity. Walking through Wrocław often feels like meeting hundreds of tiny residents, each quietly carrying out a different job. Some of the most recognizable gnomes can be found around the market square, where many visitors begin their search. Here you'll find hardworking craftsmen, musicians, merchants, and cheerful characters who seem perfectly at home among the historic streets. Others appear outside universities, museums, libraries, theaters, hospitals, banks, and government buildings, reflecting the role those institutions play in the life of the city. Several gnomes have become local celebrities. The prisoner gnome, with a heavy iron ball attached to his ankle, serves as a reminder of the orange alternative and the struggle for freedom that gave birth to the entire tradition. Nearby stands Papa Dwarf, the figure that connects today's bronze sculptures with the movement that first introduced the smiling gnome to Wrocław during the communist era. Other gnomes are much more playful. Some are caught sleeping on windowsills, others push enormous boulders, ride motorcycles, climb lamp posts, or disappear into tiny doorways built especially for them. One can be seen using an ATM, another carries oversized luggage as if leaving for a journey, while others work as doctors, firefighters, chefs, gardeners, or postal workers. Discovering these small details has become part of the fun because every sculpture rewards visitors who stop long enough to look closely. Many organizations also commission their own gnome. Universities have created scholarly characters carrying books. Museums have figures connected to art and history, while local businesses often install a gnome that reflects their profession. Rather than serving as advertisements, these sculptures become permanent additions to the city, each contributing another personality to Wrocław's growing bronze community. The search itself is what makes the experience so memorable. Some gnomes stand in obvious locations where thousands of people photograph them every day, while others remain hidden in quiet courtyards, beside bridges, behind flower pots, or near building entrances where only the most observant visitors notice them. Spotting one unexpectedly often leads people to slow down and pay closer attention to the streets around them, transforming an ordinary walk into a continuous game of discovery. No one manages to find every gnome during a single visit, and that is entirely intentional. Their ever-growing numbers encourage people to return, explore different neighborhoods, and see parts of Wrocław they might otherwise miss. In many ways, the gnomes have become unofficial guides, leading visitors far beyond the city's most famous landmarks. Today, searching for them has become one of Europe's most unusual tourist traditions, attracting families, photographers, collectors, and travelers from around the world. For many visitors, the question is no longer whether they will find a gnome, but how many they can discover before the end of their trip. As the number of gnomes continued to grow, so did the stories surrounding them. What began as a political symbol gradually became part of local folklore, and today many residents treat the bronze figures almost like lucky charms scattered across the city. While these traditions are not ancient legends passed down for centuries, they have become an important part of modern Wrocław and add another layer to the experience of searching for the city's smallest residents. One of the most common traditions is rubbing a gnome before making a wish. Visitors often touch a tiny hat, beard, hand, or shoe in the hope of bringing themselves a little good fortune. After years of being polished by millions of hands, many of these details have become noticeably brighter than the rest of the bronze, making it easy to spot which gnomes have become the most popular. Different gnomes are also believed to bring different kinds of luck. Students often search for the figures connected to universities before important exams, believing they help with knowledge and success. Business owners and entrepreneurs sometimes visit the banker or merchant gnomes in the hope of attracting prosperity, while travelers like to photograph the wandering gnomes before beginning a new journey. Whether people truly believe these traditions or simply enjoy taking part in them, they have become one of the city's most charming customs. Many local families have their own favorite gnome. Parents introduce them to their children, who grow up recognizing familiar bronze faces during walks through the city. For many residents, finding a newly installed gnome has become a small celebration, and news of a new arrival often spreads quickly through local media and social networks. The city has embraced this enthusiasm in creative ways. Official maps help visitors locate hundreds of sculptures. Mobile apps allow people to keep track of the gnomes they have already found, and special walking routes encourage exploration beyond the main tourist streets. Some travelers even turn the search into a personal challenge, trying to discover as many gnomes as possible before leaving Wrocław. The tradition continues to evolve because new gnomes are still being added. Unlike historic monuments that remain unchanged for generations, Wrocław's bronze community is constantly growing. Every new sculpture tells another story about the people, institutions, and events that shape the city today, ensuring that the collection remains connected to modern life rather than becoming a reminder of the past alone. This ability to grow while preserving its original meaning is one of the reasons the gnomes have become far more than an unusual tourist attraction. They represent history, creativity, local identity, and community spirit all at once. Few cities in the world have managed to create a symbol that is both playful and deeply connected to their own past. That is ultimately why Wrocław's gnomes continue to capture people's imagination. They invite visitors to slow down, look more carefully at the streets around them, and discover a city through hundreds of small stories instead of one grand monument. Sometimes the smallest details reveal the most memorable experiences, and nowhere is that idea more visible than in the tiny bronze figures quietly watching over the streets of Wrocław. Today, it is almost impossible to imagine Wrocław without its gnomes. What began as a symbol of peaceful resistance has grown into the city's most recognizable attraction and one of the most original urban traditions in Europe. The gnomes have changed the way people explore Wrocław. Instead of following only the city's famous landmarks, visitors wander through quiet streets, hidden courtyards, and overlooked neighborhoods in search of the next tiny bronze figure. In doing so, they discover much more than the sculptures themselves. The tradition continues to grow every year. New gnomes are regularly added, each with its own story, profession, or connection to the local community. Rather than becoming a collection of old monuments, they continue to reflect the life of the city as it changes. Perhaps that is why the gnomes became such a powerful symbol. They combine history, humor, creativity, and local identity in a way that few cities have managed to achieve. What started with a single drawing during the communist era has become a tradition known around the world. For many travelers, the first memory of Wrocław is not its churches, bridges, or historic buildings. It is the moment they spot their very first gnome and realize that an entire city has built its identity around the smallest residence anyone could imagine. At first, Wrocław's gnomes seem like a fun attraction. They make people smile, encourage visitors to explore the city, and turn an ordinary walk into a treasure hunt. But behind every bronze figure is a story that began with courage, creativity, and the determination to challenge authority through humor instead of violence. Over time, those tiny symbols outgrew their original purpose. They became part of the city's identity, bringing together history, art, tourism, and local culture in a way that feels completely unique. Few places in the world have managed to transform a political symbol into something that continues to unite residents and fascinate millions of visitors decades later. Today, new gnomes continue to appear, meaning the story is still being written. Every sculpture adds another small chapter to the city, ensuring that Wrocław never stops growing its remarkable bronze family. Perhaps that is why people keep coming back. They may arrive searching for tiny statues, but they leave having discovered something much larger. A city that chose creativity over conflict and turned one small symbol into an unforgettable part of its history.